Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the closed doors of the rich and famous? We see their perfect lives on social media and in magazines, but we all have a deep-seated belief that no one's life is that perfect. What if you were the one to stumble upon a truth so dark it could shatter a global icon's reputation? This is a story that proves the counterintuitive idea that sometimes the most insignificant person holds the most power. It's about how a humble cabin caretaker discovers a famous author's dark secret, and in that single moment, everything changed forever. This is the story of Perez, a woman who finds peace in solitude and dignity in her simple work, and Evan Jenkins, a literary giant whose arrogance is as legendary as his novels. Their worlds were never meant to collide. He lived in the spotlight. She lived in the shadows he cast. But a hidden journal, a devastating secret, and a violent storm will trap them together, forcing them to confront a truth that will either destroy them both or lead to an unthinkable, heart-aching redemption. We're about to explore what happens when the person you see as nothing sees you for everything you truly are. This isn't just a story about a shocking discovery, it's a deep dive into the nature of identity itself. How long can a person live a lie before it consumes them whole? We are going on an emotional journey into the meaning of overcoming the past, the unexpected kindness that can ignite a revolution in a human soul, and a plot twist that redefines what a love story can be. Get ready for a narrative that will make you question everything you know about forgiveness and the difficult path to redemption. We're so excited to share this incredible story with you. To help us feel closer to our amazing community, let us know in the comments what beautiful city or town you're watching from right now. We want to imagine the scenery with you. And if you feel a connection to this story, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next, and share this with someone you think will be as touched by it as we are. It all started as so many life-altering things do on a day that felt utterly ordinary. The mountain air was crisp, the only sound the rustling of Lavessa's symphony Perez knew by heart. For her, being the caretaker of this remote cabin wasn't a job, it was a sanctuary. A silent refuge from the noise of the world. Little did she know that profound silence was about to be shattered in a way she could never have foreseen. The discovery of a dark secret belonging to a man living in the spotlight was fated to change her destiny forever. She wasn't looking for anything, of course. Her intent was merely to tidy the famously messy study of the famous author, a man whose presence was as large as his literary works. Evan Jenkins was a name the world revered, but here, within these timber walls, he was simply the temporary occupant of her space. That's when her fingers brushed against something that didn't belong, a piece out of place in a life so meticulously constructed for the public eye. That single moment was the dividing line between the before and the after. The object in her hand seemed to pulse with a strange energy, an untold story that contradicted every word Evan had ever published. Suddenly, the image of the literary genius began to fray at the edges, replaced by a vulnerability that was almost tangible. This was no manuscript, no draft of his next bestseller. This was something far more intimate, far more dangerous. It was a hidden truth that had been buried deep beneath layers of success and acclaim, waiting for the right touch to bring it into the light. A genuine chill ran down her spine. The revelation was so shocking that she had to sit down, her heart hammering against her ribs. The weight of this knowledge was immense, a responsibility she hadn't asked for but that fate seemed to have placed squarely in her hands. As a humble caretaker, what was she supposed to do with the dark secret of one of the literary world's most powerful men? The discovery felt deeply emotional, connecting her to Evan Jenkins in a way she couldn't yet comprehend. The truth is, Anna's world had always been defined by its simplicity and peace. She found her purpose in maintaining this place, in ensuring everything was just so for its visitors, even for someone as demanding as Mr. Jenkins. But this new reality was complex, filled with shadows and unanswered questions. She gazed out the window at the vast, unforgiving forest and felt as if the landscape itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Her previous tranquility now felt like a distant, hazy memory. Everything she had known, the quiet routine that sustained her, now felt fragile, threatening to shatter at any moment. This secret wasn't hers to keep, and yet it was now part of her, a burden shared without permission. Before this jarring instant, her life was a calm, predictable river, flowing without interruption. Now a stone had been cast into its waters, and the ripples promised to grow into a storm. Just what kind of quiet life was it that was about to be so completely upended? Anna's life was a masterclass in quiet dignity. She didn't have much, but what she did have, she cherished with a fierce loyalty. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone to her, it was a living, breathing entity that she cared for. Being a caretaker was her calling, a role she performed with a grace that went unnoticed by most, and that was perfectly fine with her. She found peace in the solitude, a profound sense of self in the silence between the tall pines, a silence that was now charged with a hidden truth. Her days were measured by the rising and setting of the sun, not by the frantic ticking of a clock. She'd wake with the birds, her first thought on the tasks ahead, checking the firewood, tending to the small garden out back, ensuring the cabin was immaculate. It was a simple, cyclical existence that grounded her, a world away from the drama she'd just unearthed. This routine was her armor, protecting her from a world she had long since decided to keep at a comfortable distance, offering a heartaching simplicity. There was an art to her work, a subtle perfectionism in the way she folded the linens or arranged the books on the shelves, even the ones by the famous author himself. It was a kind of unspoken respect for the space and for the people who sought refuge in it, even if they didn't see her. Anna Perez believed that true kindness was often invisible, found in the thoughtful details that make a person feel cared for without ever knowing who to thank. This philosophy was about to be put to the ultimate test. Her interactions were few, limited to the grocer in the nearby village and the occasional lost hiker. She preferred it that way. People were complicated, their lives messy and loud. The mountains, on the other hand, were honest. They demanded respect but offered unparalleled peace in return, a fair trade in her eyes. This peaceful isolation had been her choice, a conscious stepping away from the chaos of modern life. But now, chaos had found her in the form of a devastating dark secret. She never craved the spotlight or the validation of others. Her fulfillment came from within, from a job well done. To be a good caretaker was enough for her. But the journal she now held felt like a bridge to a world she had actively avoided, a world of ambition, fame, and deep emotional pain. It was a world personified by Evan Jenkins, a man who, she was beginning to realize, was a universe of contradictions. The quiet life she had so carefully built for herself was now on a collision course with his. And so she stood there, caught between two worlds. The serene, predictable life she knew and the turbulent, shocking reality of the man who used her cabin as his personal escape. She was just a woman who found joy in simple things, in the honest labor of her hands. How could she possibly navigate the complexities of a life so far removed from her own? The contrast was stark, and it was becoming painfully clear that the man who owned this secret saw her as little more than a ghost in his grand narrative. Evan Jenkins arrived at the cabin not as a man seeking peace, but as a king returning to a distant rustic castle. To him, the world was a stage, and he was its undisputed famous author, its main character. The cabin was simply another set piece, a remote location where he could escape the fawning crowds and write his next masterpiece. The people who maintained it, like Anna, were invisible, part of the background scenery, their lives and feelings utterly irrelevant to his grand, self-centered narrative. He was a man drowning in his own importance. He barely acknowledged her presence, offering a curt nod if their paths happened to cross, his eyes sweeping past her as if she were a coat rack or a potted plant. Ana Perez was simply the caretaker. A function, not a person. He never used her name. Why would he? In his mind, she existed solely to facilitate his comfort, to ensure his sanctuary remained undisturbed. This casual dehumanization wasn't even malicious. It was simply the natural byproduct of a man who had not been challenged, truly challenged, in decades. His arrogance was a finely crafted shield, polished to a brilliant shine by years of awards, 5-star reviews, and public adoration. He believed his own hype, convinced that his emotional depth was reserved for the page and that in real life, he was above the petty concerns of lesser mortals. He was there to wrestle with prose, to birth literary worlds, not to exchange pleasantries with the help. This towering ego, however, was built on a foundation of sand, protecting a dark secret he couldn't bear to face. He treated the cabin with a careless disdain, leaving coffee rings on ancient wood, tossing clothes aside, his creative chaos a storm for Anna to silently clean up. Each mess was a small act of dominance, a reinforcement of his status. He was the genius, she was the cleaner. It never once occurred to him to offer a word of thanks, to show a shred of common kindness. Such gestures were for other people, for equals, and in Evan's world, he had very few of those. He was about to experience a great surprise. This trip was no different. He was wrestling with a difficult chapter, his frustration palpable in the tense set of his jaw and the thunderous way he paced his study. He saw the world only through the lens of his own needs, his own creative struggles. The quiet woman who kept his world in order was just a ghost, a pair of hands that magically refilled the coffee pot and tidied his whirlwind. He was oblivious to the fact that this ghost was on the verge of discovering the hidden truth that defined him. He was a man who commanded legions of fans, whose words could move millions to tears, and yet he was utterly incapable of a simple, human connection with the person right in front of him. He saw a servant, not a soul. He saw a function, not a woman with her own life, her own quiet dignity. But the stage was being set for a dramatic plot twist, one where the scenery would suddenly step into the spotlight, forcing the king to see his kingdom and himself in a completely new and terrifying light. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Inside, the silence of the cabin was deep and resonant, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within its walls. Anna was in Evan's study, a room that was her personal battlefield of entropy. Stacks of books teetered precariously, notes were scattered like fallen leaves, and empty mugs stood as monuments to his creative torment. Her job as caretaker was to bring order to this chaos, a task she performed with methodical patience, never judging the man behind the mess. She was dusting a bookshelf, her movements practiced and gentle, when she noticed it. Behind a row of leather-bound classics, tucked deep into the shadows, was a small, unassuming object. It wasn't one of his sleek, expensive notebooks or a galley proof from his publisher. This was something else entirely. It was a worn, faded journal, its leather cover cracked with age and its pages bulging, suggesting it had been filled to capacity and perhaps revisited many times over. It radiated an aura of secrecy. Her first instinct was to leave it, to respect the boundary between a guest's public life and their private one. But something held her back. It felt different from his other possessions. It didn't feel like the property of a famous author. It felt like the possession of a man in pain. Curiosity, a feeling she rarely indulged, began to prick at her. This object was clearly not meant to be found. It was a deliberate act of concealment, a hidden truth tucked away from the world. With a hesitant hand, she pulled it from its hiding place. The journal felt heavy, not just with the weight of its pages, but with the weight of the stories it held. There was no title, no name on the cover, nothing to indicate its owner, but she knew. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this belonged to Evan Jenkins. It was the one piece of his life that wasn't curated for public consumption, the one thing that was raw, unedited, and achingly real. A surprise of the highest order. This was a profound violation, and she knew it. Snooping was not in her nature. Her integrity as a caretaker was all she had. Yet, the energy coming off this book was like a magnet, a silent plea to be heard. It seemed to hold the key to understanding the walking contradiction that was Evan Jenkins' genius. The brute, the man who could write with such deep empathy, yet show so little of it in his own life. This was the source, the epicenter of his dark secret. She stood frozen for a long moment, the journal in her hands, her heart in her throat. Her quiet, orderly world had just been presented with a Pandora's box. Opening it could unleash a torrent of consequences for him and for her. But leaving it felt like an act of cowardice, like ignoring a cry for help. With a deep breath that did little to calm her trembling, she made a decision. She sat down in his large leather chair and opened the journal to the first page, unaware that this act was the first step toward a shared destiny. The first page was dated 30 years prior, the handwriting a frantic, youthful scrawl, so different from the confident signature of the famous author. As Anna read, the world outside the cabin window seemed to dissolve. The words on the page were not a story, they were a confession, a raw, unfiltered torrent of guilt and pain. It was the voice of a young man, terrified and alone, grappling with a choice that had irrevocably altered the course of his life. This wasn't fiction, this was a shocking reality. The journal told a tale that was a universe away from the polished biography Evan Jenkins presented to the world. He wasn't the self-made literary lion who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He was a man who had made a terrible mistake, a choice born of fear and ambition that had devastating consequences for someone else. The narrative was deeply emotional, filled with regret and a self-loathing that felt so potent. It seemed to seep from the very ink on the page, a dark secret poisoning his life from the inside out. As she turned the pages, a hidden truth began to emerge, one so profound it made her gasp. The foundation of his entire career, the very story that had launched him into stardom, was built on a lie. It was a narrative he had stolen, a life he had appropriated, leaving the true owner of the story in his shadow, forgotten and broken. The man celebrated for his originality was in fact a plagiarist of the most intimate kind, had stolen someone's soul, their pain, and called it art. Anna felt a wave of nausea. The man she knew as arrogant and dismissive was revealed to be something far more complex. A man who had been humiliated by his own weakness and had spent a lifetime running from it. His entire persona was a fortress built to protect a fragile, guilty secret. The wealth, the fame, the awards, they weren't trophies of success. They were bricks in a wall, designed to keep the world out and his shame locked securely inside. It was a revelation of incredible sadness. This wasn't just about literary theft. It was a deeply personal story, a love story that had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. The journal spoke of a person he had loved, a person whose trust he had shattered in the most profound way imaginable. This betrayal was the original sin, the wound that never healed, the source of the anger and isolation that defined him. The plot twist wasn't just that he was a fraud, it was that he was a man who had destroyed his own chance at happiness for a taste of fame. The final entries were sporadic, written years apart, each one more desperate than the last. They spoke of a hollow victory, of a life lived in fear of exposure, of the ghost of the past that haunted his every waking moment. The famous author was a phantom, a character he played, while the real Evan Jenkins was a prisoner of his own making. As Anna closed the journal, her hands shaking, she heard the heavy crunch of tires on gravel outside. He was back, and her world was about to explode. The cabin door flew open with a bang, and there he stood. Evan Jenkins, the famous author himself, his face a mask of thunder. His eyes, which usually ignored her, were now locked onto her with a terrifying intensity. They darted from her face to the worn leather journal sitting in her lap. For a moment, the world stood still. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the unspoken accusation and the raw, unadulterated panic that flashed in his eyes before being replaced by pure, blistering rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was a low growl, a dangerous sound that promised violence. He stalked across the room, his towering presence seeming to shrink the space around her. "That is private. You have no right. Who do you think you are, rummaging through my personal things?" He snatched the journal from her hands, clutching it to his chest like a shield. He was a cornered animal, ready to lash out with all the fury he possessed to protect his dark secret. He began to pace the room, his movements agitated, his words dripping with venom and condescension. "Are you looking for a payday? Is that it? Did you think you'd find something juicy in there? Something you could sell to the tabloids?" He sneered, his face contorted with disgust. "How much do you want? I'll write you a check. Just name your price, and then get the hell out of my house." He was trying to reduce her to a common thief, to make her feel small and humiliated, using his wealth as a weapon. But Anna didn't flinch. She simply sat there, watching him, her gaze steady. Her silence seemed to infuriate him even more. He wanted a reaction fare, tears, a stammering apology, anything to reaffirm his power over her. He was Evan Jenkins, after all. People cowered before him. The quiet dignity of the cabin's caretaker was not something his ego knew how to process. He was throwing all his power at her, and it was like throwing stones at the ocean. The lack of a typical reaction was a surprise he wasn't prepared for. "You're just the help," he spat, the words intended to wound, to remind her of her place in his world. "Your job is to clean my messes, not to dig through my life for scraps of gossip. You have no idea what you're dealing with." He was trying to intimidate her, to loom over her with the full weight of his fame and fortune, to make her feel the chasm between their stations. He wanted her to see him as a god and herself as an insect, easily crushed under his boot. This was his defense mechanism. But as he raged, something shifted in the room. His fury, which was meant to be a terrifying display of power, started to look like something else entirely. It looked like desperation. It looked like the frantic panic of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. The hidden truth was out, and his anger was nothing more than a noisy, pathetic attempt to shove it back into the box. He was shouting at her, but he was really shouting at the ghost he'd been running from for 30 years. Instead of cowering, Anna rose slowly from the chair, her movements calm and deliberate. She looked him directly in the eye, not with defiance, but with a profound and unnerving empathy. Where he expected to see fear, he saw a deep, heart-wrenching sadness. It wasn't pity, it was something far more potent. It was understanding. She wasn't looking at the famous author throwing a tantrum. She was seeing the terrified young man from the journal, a boy still trapped inside the body of a successful, angry man. "You must have been so scared," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through his tirade like a beam of light in a dark room. The words hung in the air between them, simple and yet so powerful. It was not the accusation he was braced for. It wasn't a threat or a demand. It was a simple, heart-aching acknowledgement of his pain. The unexpectedness of her response was a surprise that left him momentarily speechless, his anger sputtering out like a dying flame. Her genuine kindness was a language he had long forgotten. In his world, every interaction was a transaction, a power play, a move on a chessboard. People were either obstacles, tools, or sycophants. The idea that someone, especially the invisible caretaker he had dismissed so easily, could look at his ugliest, most protected wound and respond not with revulsion, but with compassion was utterly foreign to him. It disarmed him completely, leaving him feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way his anger never could. She took a small step closer, not in aggression, but as an offering of peace. "That much pain," she continued, her voice gentle to carry it. "Alone for all these years, I can't imagine how heavy it must be." She wasn't talking about the dark secret as a scandalous piece of information. She was talking about it as a burden, a wound that had clearly never been allowed to heal. She saw past the lie and saw the suffering that had fueled it, a profound display of emotional intelligence. Evan stood there, the journal still clutched in his hand, his mind reeling. He had prepared for a fight, for blackmail, for a battle of wills. He was ready to be hated, to be exposed, to be humiliated on a global scale. What he was not prepared for was grace. Anna's compassion was a quiet force, and it was systematically dismantling the fortress he had spent a lifetime building. He felt the anger draining out of him, replaced by a bewildering mix of shame and a strange, unfamiliar flicker of relief. He had expected a storm, but she had offered him a harbor. He had shown her the very worst of himself, and she had responded by showing him a part of her soul he didn't know existed. For the first time, he truly saw her Anna Perez, the woman who did more than just care for his cabin. In that moment, he began to see her as a person whose quiet strength was more formidable than all his wealth and fame combined. But what could possibly come next after a revelation of this magnitude? Evan didn't know how to react. His entire life had operated on a simple, cynical principle: everyone wants something. People were kind to the famous author because they wanted his endorsement, his money, or a piece of his fame. They wanted to be seen with him, to borrow his light. It was a world of transactions, and he was a master at navigating it. He understood greed, ambition, and fear. He did not, however, understand genuine, unselfish kindness, and it left him completely and utterly baffled. He looked at Anna, this quiet caretaker, whose world should have been a million miles from his, and he felt a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. She held the power to destroy him. With the knowledge of his dark secret, she could ruin his career, his legacy, everything he had built. Yet, she offered him not a threat, but compassion. It made no sense. It was a plot twist in the narrative of his life that he could never have written because he didn't believe such characters existed. "Why aren't you screaming at me?" he finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Why aren't you calling your lawyer? That's what people do." He was genuinely asking, seeking to understand this bizarre anomaly. He was trying to fit her into a box, to assign her a motive he could recognize, but she defied every category he had. Her empathy was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a code he couldn't crack, and it was more unsettling than any threat she could have. Maid, this woman, who he had treated as less than human, was showing him a level of humanity he had only ever written about in his novels. It was a shocking role reversal. He was the one who was supposed to understand the human heart, to have deep emotional insights. Yet, here he was, completely bewildered by a simple act of grace. Her compassion wasn't a strategy, it was her nature. And this simple truth was shaking the very foundations of his cynical worldview. He felt a strange and unwelcome emotion bubbling up inside him: shame. Not the old familiar shame of his hidden truth, but a new, acute shame for how he had treated her. He had seen her as an object, a functionary, and in one heart-aching moment, she had revealed herself to have more character and integrity than he could ever claim. He, the celebrated genius, felt small and humiliated in her presence, not by her judgment, but by her utter lack of it. It was a humbling he desperately needed. As he stood there, wrestling with this confusing new reality, the wind outside began to howl. The sky, once clear, was now a dark, bruised purple. The gentle rustling of leaves had transformed into a violent thrashing. It was as if the emotional turmoil inside the cabin had summoned a physical manifestation from the heavens. A storm was coming, a real one, and it was about to trap them together, forcing this impossible connection into an even more intense and unavoidable crucible. The change was terrifyingly fast. One moment, the wind was just a mournful sigh through the pines. The next, it was a physical force, a raging beast trying to tear them from its foundation. Rain began to fall, not in drops but in solid wind-driven sheets that lashed against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The world outside vanished into a gray, violent blur. Any thought of Evan leaving or Anna forcing him out was instantly erased. They were trapped, prisoners of the mountain's sudden, violent fury. Evan, a man accustomed to being in control, found himself utterly powerless. He checked his phone. No signal. The landline was dead, its wire likely snapped by a falling branch. The familiar hum of the refrigerator died as the lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged the cabin into a deep, oppressive darkness. The storm had severed them completely from the outside world. They were an island, isolated in a roaring sea of wind and rain, a perfect setting for a dark secret to play out. In that first moment of blackout, a primal fear flickered in the eyes of the famous author. His fame, his wealth, his connection were all useless here. He was just a man in a dark room with a woman who knew his deepest shame and a storm that sounded like the end of the world. The raw, untamed power of nature was a brutal reminder of his own insignificance, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. This sudden helplessness was a shocking blow to his ego. Anna, however, moved with a calm, practiced purpose that was nothing short of mesmerizing. She wasn't panicked. She was prepared. This was her domain, and the storm was a familiar, if unwelcome, guest. Her voice cut through the darkness, steady and reassuring. "Stay here. There are candles in the kitchen drawer and flashlights by the door." She was no longer just the caretaker. She had become the captain of this small besieged ship, and her quiet competence was a beacon in the chaos. Evan found himself following her instructions without a second thought, a bizarre role reversal. That was not lost on him. He, who commanded rooms and silenced critics with a single glance, was now taking orders from the woman he had tried to intimidate just moments before. The storm had stripped away their societal roles, leaving only the raw truth of their situation. He was helpless, and she was capable. This unexpected reliance was a humbling experience, a surprise that kept on unfolding. They were sealed in the cabin, the storm raging around them like a physical manifestation of the emotional tempest between them. There was no escape, no distraction, no outside world to run to. It was just the two of them, the suffocating darkness, and the hidden truth that now lay bare on the table. Destiny, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. It was forcing them to confront each other, to navigate this new, terrifying intimacy, whether they were ready for it or not. In the flickering candlelight, the world was reduced to shadows and essentials. Evan's expensive watch and designer clothes looked absurd, relics from a world that no longer existed. Here, in the heart of the storm, value was measured differently. It wasn't about bestseller lists or bank accounts. It was about knowing how to build a fire with damp wood, how to secure a rattling shutter, how to find the emergency water supply. All skills the famous author woefully lacked, but which the caretaker possessed in spades. He watched, silent and wide-eyed, as Anna moved through the cabin with an economy of motion that was both graceful and powerful. She worked not with frantic energy, but with a deep, unshakable calm. She was a force of nature in her own right, a quiet counterpoint to the howling chaos outside. For the first time, Evan Jenkins was not the most capable person in the room, and the realization was profoundly unsettling. He felt like a child, completely dependent on her strength and knowledge for his comfort and safety. She handed him a heavy blanket and a mug of steaming tea shed somehow brewed on a small camp stove. The simple act of kindness felt monumental. It was an offering of warmth and comfort, given freely, without any expectation of reward. He, who could have bought 1,000 blankets, found himself deeply grateful for this single one. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, a mix of gratitude and the sharp, emotional sting of being so utterly reliant on someone he had so thoroughly disdained. The storm showed no signs of letting up. With every crash of thunder, the cabin seemed to shudder, and Evan would flinch. Anna, however, remained serene. She told him stories of past storms, of winters so harsh the cabin was buried in snow for weeks. She spoke of overcoming nature's fury with patience and respect. Her voice was a steady anchor in the terrifying darkness, a quiet testament to a resilience he had never known. He was listening, truly listening, to her for the very first time. He, the great wordsmith, found himself at a loss for words. What could he possibly say? Thank you felt ridiculously inadequate. An apology for his earlier behavior seemed hollow and self-serving in the face of her quiet competence. So he just watched her, his respect growing with every passing hour. He was witnessing a form of strength that was authentic and unpretentious, a strength that came from character, not from status. It was a heart-aching and deeply humbling lesson. The blackout leveled the playing field in a way nothing else could have. His power was an illusion, a currency that held no value on this isolated mountain. Her power, however, her practical skills, her calm spirit, her innate goodness was real and immediate. The plot twist of their shared destiny continued to unfold. The king had been dethroned by the storm, and he was now completely at the mercy of the quiet, capable queen of this small candlelit kingdom. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the guttering of candles and the unrelenting symphony of the storm. The silence inside the cabin, once tense and accusatory, slowly softened into something else. It became a shared space, a vacuum waiting to be filled. The darkness provided a strange sort of anonymity, a cloak that made confession seem possible. Evan's carefully constructed walls, battered by the storm outside and her kindness inside, finally began to crumble, brick by painful brick. It started with a simple halting phrase. "You were right," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I was scared." He didn't look at her, but stared into the dancing flame of the candle, as if the entire story was written there. He began to talk, the words spilling out of him, at first a trickle, then a flood. He spoke of his youth, of his desperate hunger for a life different from the one he was born into, a life of significance. He was finally giving voice to the hidden truth had held captive for so long. He told her the whole story, the unvarnished version that had never been written down, even in the secret journal. He spoke of the other person, the true author of his first celebrated work. He described their love story, a bond forged in shared dreams and youthful passion. He painted a picture of a brilliant, fragile soul who had trusted him completely, who had shared their most painful experiences with him, only to have him betray that trust in the most devastating way imaginable. It was a deeply emotional confession. He didn't make excuses or try to paint himself in a better light. For the first time, he was brutally honest. He admitted that he had been a coward, that he had seen a chance for fame and had taken it, convincing himself it was what they both wanted. He described the moment he published the story under his own name, and the subsequent, deafening silence from the person he had betrayed. He had become a famous author at the cost of his own soul, and the guilt had been his constant companion. Ever since, he talked about the years of running, of building his fame higher and higher, as if he could outclimb the shadow of his dark secret. But it was always there, in the quiet moments, in the reflection in the mirror. He confessed that his arrogance was a defense, his anger a shield against the crippling shame that threatened to swallow him whole. He had become a character of his own creation, a man he didn't even like, because facing the real Evan Jenkins was simply too painful. This was his path to overcoming his past. Anna listened. She just listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't offer platitudes. She sat in the darkness with him, a silent, steady presence, and let him pour out 30 years of poison. Her quiet attention was a gift, a space for him to finally be his true broken self. The storm raged on outside, but inside this small cabin, something was breaking to the chains of a secret that had held a man captive for his entire adult life. As Evan's voice trailed off into the darkness, the only sounds were the howling wind and his own ragged breaths. He had laid his soul bare, offering up his ugliest truths, fully expecting to be met with disgust or condemnation. He braced himself for the verdict, for the final, crushing judgment he had always known he deserved. He waited for her to tell him he was a monster, a fraud, a thief. The silence that followed his confession was the most terrifying moment of his life, more frightening than the storm itself. But the condemnation never came. Instead, after a long moment, Anna simply said, "That person, they must have loved you very much to trust you with their pain." Her words were not an absolution, but something far more powerful, an acknowledgement of the love that existed before the betrayal. She wasn't focused on his crime, but on the heartbreaking tragedy of the shattered love story. Her empathy was a gentle hand, touching the original wound rather than the scar tissue of his guilt. It was a heart-aching perspective. This simple act of reframing was a plot twist for his soul. All his life, he had seen the story through the lens of his own shame and fear. He had focused on his guilt, his secret, his lie. Anna, with her quiet wisdom, saw the human tragedy at its core. She saw the loss, the broken hearts, the pain that radiated outward from his single act of cowardice. Her kindness gave him a new language to understand his own past, shifting the focus from his monstrosity to the shared human frailty of it all. He had spent his life being celebrated by a world that loved a lie and haunted by a truth he believed made him unlovable. He was the celebrated famous author to millions, but inside, he felt like a fraud. In this dark, storm-tossed cabin, this humble caretaker offered him something no award or accolade ever could validation. She didn't excuse his actions, but she saw the broken man behind them. She saw him, the real him, and she didn't turn away in disgust. For the first time, he didn't feel like a monster performing for an audience. He just felt human. Flawed, broken, and profoundly sad, but human nonetheless. Anna's non-judgmental presence was a balm to a wound that had been festering for 3 decades. It was a profound act of grace, an emotional release so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He wept, not for his lost fame, but for the man he might have been, for the love he had thrown away. The journey to redemption had begun. She didn't try to comfort him with empty words. She just let him cry, her quiet strength holding the space for his grief. She understood that some pain is too deep for words, that sometimes the greatest act of kindness is to simply bear witness. In her quiet, unwavering acceptance, Evan Jenkins finally found the one thing he had been secretly, desperately searching for his entire life, a safe place to be humiliated, to be broken, and to begin the long, arduous journey of overcoming himself. The storm finally broke with the dawn. A weak, watery light filtered through the windows, illuminating a world washed clean and a room where everything had changed. The power was still out, the silence profound, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was peaceful. Evan looked at Anna, who was dozing lightly in her chair, her face soft in the morning light. In that moment, a profound and undeniable truth settled over him with the weight of a revelation. All the trophies lining his shelves, the honorary doctorates, the glowing reviews were just gilded plastic and empty words. They were applause for a character he had been playing, a ghost he had created. They celebrated the famous author, not the man. He had spent his entire life chasing these symbols of worth, believing they would fill the cavernous hole inside him, only to find they were meaningless. They were noise. Anna's quiet presence, her unwavering decency, was substance. He looked around the rustic cabin, a place he had always seen as a mere convenience, a backdrop for his genius. Now he saw it through her eyes. He saw the care in every detail, the love polished into the old wooden floors, the dignity in its simplicity. This cabin, like its caretaker, possessed an authenticity he had never known. It was real. It wasn't pretending to be anything other than what it was. It was a heart-aching lesson in integrity, presented to him without a single word being spoken. Her kindness had been a mirror, forcing him to see the stark contrast between her genuine character and his own carefully fabricated persona. She hadn't demanded respect, she had earned it simply by being herself. She hadn't sought power, she wielded it quietly through her competence and compassion. She was everything he was not: honest, grounded, and at peace with herself. This realization wasn't painful, it was clarifying, like a lens snapping into perfect focus after years of blurriness. He thought of the endless parties, the fawning interviewers, the superficial connections that defined his life. He had 1,000 acquaintances, and not a single friend who knew the hidden truth of his existence. He was utterly, completely alone, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. Anna, in her solitude, was more connected to the world and to herself than he had ever been. It was a shocking paradox, and it laid bare the poverty of his own life. He realized that all the success in the world was worthless without a single person to share your true self with. He had chased a fantasy of greatness, and in doing so, had missed the chance for genuine human connection. Her quiet authenticity was a rare and precious gift, more valuable than any bestseller list or literary prize. It was a surprise to his soul, a quiet revolution that reordered his entire universe. The path to his redemption was becoming clearer, and it led directly through her. As the day wore on, a new understanding began to dawn in Evan's mind. For 30 years, he had treated his dark secret like a source of toxic shame, a stain on his character that must be hidden at all costs. He saw it as a reflection of his own monstrosity, a permanent indictment of his soul. He had conflated the action with his identity, believing the lie that because he had done a terrible thing, he was, at his core, a terrible person. It was a prison of his own making, and he had lived in it for decades. But Anna's reaction had changed the very nature of the secret. Her compassion didn't erase the wrongness of his actions, but it separated the act from the man. She saw it not as a stain, but as a wound, a deep infected wound that had been left to fester in the dark, poisoning everything it touched. Shame keeps a wound hidden. Kindness, he was beginning to see, is the antiseptic that allows it to be cleaned, to be exposed to the air, to finally begin the slow and painful process of healing. He realized his anger, his arrogance, his reclusiveness were all symptoms of this festering wound. He had been trying to protect himself, not from the world, but from the pain of his own past. He pushed people away because he believed that if anyone got close enough to see the hidden truth, they would recoil in horror. He had been so humiliated by his own history that he preemptively rejected everyone, ensuring he would never have to face that rejection from another person. Anna's grace had done the impossible. It had made him feel safe enough to look directly at his own wound without flinching. She hadn't recoiled. She hadn't run. She had simply sat with him in the darkness and acknowledged his pain. This simple, profound act of acceptance was the first step toward his redemption. It allowed him to see the secret, not as a life sentence of shame, but as a part of his story that needed to be addressed with honesty and courage, not hidden with fear. The love story he had destroyed so long ago was the source of the injury, but Anna's compassion was the beginning of the cure. It was a plot twist of destiny that the person to offer him this path to healing wasn't a therapist or a priest, but a humble cabin caretaker whom he had completely overlooked. It was a heart-aching lesson in how the most profound wisdom often comes from the most unexpected places, a true surprise for his weary soul. He understood now that overcoming this wasn't about burying the secret deeper or finding a way to excuse it. It was about owning it. It was about transforming it from a source of shame into a testament of his human frailty and, hopefully, his capacity for change. The secret wasn't a monster to be slain, it was a part of his history to be integrated. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he could not have reached this understanding without her quiet, unwavering kindness. A week later, Evan Jenkins stood before a sea of cameras and microphones, but he was a different man. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, vulnerable strength. He didn't look like a famous author at a press conference. He looked like a man about to set himself free. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the room. His statement began not with a denial or an excuse, but with a simple, shocking confession that sent ripples of disbelief through the global literary community. He told them everything. He revealed the dark secret he had harbored for 30 years, the hidden truth about his first and most beloved book. He named the true author, giving them the credit and honor they had been denied for so long. He didn't spare himself, detailing his own cowardice and ambition with a brutal honesty that was more powerful than any of his fictional works. He was systematically dismantling the myth of Evan Jenkins, and in its place, revealing a flawed, broken, and deeply human man. But the most powerful part of his confession was yet to come. "I am not telling you this because I was caught," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am telling you this because someone showed me that a secret like this is not a life sentence of shame, but a wound that can only heal when exposed to the light." He spoke of a fierce storm, a power outage, and the quiet wisdom of a cabin caretaker who had been trapped with him, a woman named Perez. "She did not blackmail me. She did not threaten me," he continued, his eyes finding Anna, who stood quietly at the back of the room, away from the cameras. "She did an infinitely more powerful and difficult thing. She showed me kindness." He explained that it was her compassion that gave him the strength for this redemption, her grace that allowed him to see a path toward overcoming a lifetime of fear. He credited her not for her silence, but for giving him the voice to finally speak his truth. Then, in a final stunning plot twist, he looked directly into the main camera, but his words were only for her. "The world knows me for the stories I write," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "But the greatest story I will ever be a part of is not one I have written. It is the one I am living now." He paused, his voice breaking. "It is a love story. Her love, her grace, and her courage saved me. Perez saved me." The world was stunned into silence. They had come for a scandal, but were given a lesson in courage, humility, and the transformative power of human connection. The story of the famous author and the humble caretaker became something else entirely, a testament to the idea that true redemption is possible, that it is never too late to face your own dark secret, and that sometimes destiny delivers its most heart-aching miracles in the quietest, most unexpected of ways. What an incredible journey of redemption, kindness, and unexpected connection. The story of Perez and Evan Jenkins started with a dark secret, but it blossomed into a powerful love story that proves that the most profound changes come from the most unexpected places. It's a testament to the idea that no one is beyond saving, and that true strength isn't about hiding our wounds, but having the courage to let someone else help us heal them. Their story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest overcoming is simply learning to forgive ourselves. It's fascinating how we build walls around ourselves, isn't it? Evan Jenkins had constructed an entire fortress of fame and arrogance, all to protect the deeply humiliated and vulnerable man he was inside. It took the quiet courage of one person who dared to show compassion instead of judgment to begin dismantling it. This story truly makes you think about the masks we all wear and the shocking power of a single moment of genuine human connection to inspire a complete transformation. Now we want to hear from you. This story was so emotional for us to put together, and we'd love to know how it resonated with you. What part of their journey impacted you the most? Was it Anna's quiet, unwavering strength, or Evan's difficult but heartaching path to admitting his hidden truth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you expect a plot twist with a different ending, or did you love the way their destiny finally unfolded? If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to you. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss the powerful content we have planned. We have a whole library of videos waiting for you, so feel free to explore our past work after this. Thank you for being a part of our community and for sharing this moment with us. Stay tuned for the next one.